And yeah, welcome to Boston, city of freedom, first and fun. Freedom, birthplace of the American Revolution, a leader in all sorts of civil rights activities, including the abolitionist movement. For us, we've got the Charles River we're going to travel on later in the tour. There's the Mystic River out by East Boston, the Neponset River down by Dorchester. Shawmut also had a freshwater spring. It looked something like this initially, only about 1.5 miles square, surrounded almost entirely by water except this land bridge that connected to the mainland. And at a really high tide, it could actually flood, and Shawmut would become an island briefly. And that would be like at a full moon, high tide kind of time. And this is what was here when the Puritans arrived in 1630. They came here from England because they were not getting along very well with the other people in England, especially the Church of England. The Puritans and the Anglicans really did not get. And so they basically came here for religion. On that later, though.
Today we're going for then. Oh no, what's the question? Una ba na camera to? What do you think this store will be like? What do you think about this store? You think it's gonna be fun or not? What do you
I
think?
don't know. I don't have a view.
Don't expect a lot, you may be disappointed. If you expect a little, you know, then it's gonna be good.
Mas eu fazendo fast fun.
First contact tour.
Fall. The rear portion of the canopy is retractable. Unlock the latch located on the back of the canopy and slide it forward.
From my angle. Yep, you're clear. We might, like I said, people are going to quack at us. We should be prepared to respond. So we can respond either, you know, as individuals, or if we want to do it as a group, we need a cue so we can quack together. My cue is time stream. So when I say time stream, I'm looking for everyone to say quack, quack along with. Now, it is to talk about. Ooh, it looks like they're putting up some sort of an art display over here. It's really common to find art installations on the Rose Kennedy Greenway, which is this beautiful park here, and this section is a really popular spot for that. This is brand new, they're just putting it up, so I have no idea what it's about. But you can see they have a little green sticker that's gone on the side of that pillar right there. And that's probably the information about either this specific aspect or possibly the installation as a whole. So I would imagine that by the time we get back, we might have most of the installation already set up. So that's something to check out after the tour, maybe. But we are heading up State Street, or we will be trying to anyway. State Street was originally called King's Street. And it was not nearly as long as it is today. Initially, it was waterfront property. This was a wharf. Now, the first major historic site we're going to see on our tour is at the next traffic light. The old state building that we're coming up to is where the Boston Massacre took place. March 5th, 1770. There was a lot of tension in the colonies in the years leading up to the American Revolution. And the first time it really came to a head was in this intersection up ahead. That is actually kind of how it went. They wouldn't give him space for his church, so he stole a corner of the burial ground. Not a nice guy. Again, the Anglicans and the Puritans did not get along. So the King's Chapel has no affiliation with the burial ground. It's no affiliation with the Church of England anymore either. It's now a Unitarian church, but that was the first Anglican church in the colony, or in the city anyway. It was originally was invented here. You can see a picture on the wall. Technically a cake, not a pie. Parker House, so the Tremont Temple Baptist Church to our left, first integrated church in the United States, first church where people of all races could sit side by side without being segregated. And then a little further down, we have the Beantown Pub on our left. That's the only place in the world you can sit and enjoy a cold Sam Adams. Well, come across the street at Cold Sam Adams. It's true. You only get that joke when we get stuck in traffic. Sam Adams is actually in the Granary Burial Ground coming up on our right. In the middle it says Franklin. That's Ben Franklin's parents. Ben himself's in Philadelphia, but he was born in Boston. In the back is Paul Revere of the famous Midnight Ride. We'll talk more about him later in the tour. In the corner, that big pillar is John Hancock. He would be very happy with the big pillar for him because he was very vain, very influential in Boston's politics, and a very passionate speaker as well. In his prime, his catchphrase was, "I'd rather be struck down by a lightning bolt than," whatever the topic of the day was. Anybody want to guess how James Otis died? He was struck by lightning. True story. Isn't that incredible? The hymn America, My Country 'Tis of Thee, was sung for the very first time by a choir of school children on the front steps. And famous abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison made his first anti-slavery speech from that church as well. Here's Boston Common to our right. Boston Common is the oldest public park in the country, established in 1634 as common land. The British Army camped out here. During the American Civil War, the Union or Northern soldiers did their drills here, and it's still common land today. Any event that takes place here is free to the public. You can, it's still part of the Green Line to this day. And even so, we have had a lot of Broadway shows grace our stage. I don't just mean national tours. I mean pre-Broadway. Because all these old vaudeville theaters were built in the early 1900s, and the acoustics are perfect. So they were built before microphones. I had the pleasure about 8 years ago of seeing a concert at Boston's Orpheum Theater. And for the finale, the band hushed everybody for the encore. They hushed everybody and unplugged everything a cappella. It was magical. New England Law School on our left, 1908, originally opened as the Pool of Law, the first law school for women in the United States. And I find it very appropriate that they ended up in the theater district because Portia is a reference to Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. In Merchant of Venice, Portia is, the man is a poet, the bird is a raven. Edgar Allan Poe. Did you know he was born in Boston? I didn't before I started doing these tours. He was born in this neighborhood. He didn't like Boston. He really didn't fit in here. And he didn't live here very long and then came back as an adult and continued to numbers of the main characters from Make Way for Ducklings. And there's a really fun tradition that has cropped up over the years of decorating the sculptures. Sometimes for sports celebrations, sometimes for change of seasons or holidays, all sorts of fun stuff. The ducks are over here on our left, not decorated today. We've got Mrs. Mallard in front, followed by her children, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack. If they turn around to be Quack, Pack, Whack, Knack, Mack, Lack, Cack, and Jack. If you want to learn that, it's alphabetical order and a lot of practice. This little book is Ducks on Parade. It's brand new this year, and it's pictures of the costumes the ducks have been decorated with over the years as they become a real visual representation of the spirit of Boston. Coming up ahead of us on our right is the Bull and Finch pub, though you all probably know it better by a different name. Cheers, where everybody knows your name. The Bull and Finch was the inspiration for the famous TV show Cheers, which ran for 11 years on NBC. The producers wanted a real-world analog for their TV bar. German immigrant workers working dawn till dusk, 6 days a week. Really backbreaking work. But after about 40 years, they had this whole neighborhood created. You can see very straight streets. It's all in a grid. I know Boston has a reputation for being difficult. Most people are familiar with George as the first president of the United States. Before that, he was the commander of the Continental Army. He took command of the Continental Army in Cambridge, Massachusetts on July 3rd, 1775, exactly a year and a day before the Declaration of Independence would be ratified. And I do deliberately say ratified because it was not signed until August of that year. The the idea of declaring independence was voted and agreed upon on July 2nd. On July 4th. And Newbury Street also has a lot of salons and restaurants. There's some beautiful churches if you want to check out beautiful old architecture like the Church of the Covenant ahead of us on our right. This is the tallest church steeple in Boston. And the Church of the Covenant is also full of Tiffany window worked into it. And he argued this led to richer and colors. This is one of 2 large collections of Tiffany glass. The other one's just 1 street over. I'll point it out when we get up there. We are making our way up to Clarendon Street. As we're going to see an adorable little chocolate shop that has no historic relevance whatsoever, so why am I pointing it out? Well, it's adorable. You're going to notice it. I may as well point it out. Also, I love chocolate. And it's a cheap excuse to mention that Boston had the very first chocolate factory in the country. Not this. This is L.A. Burdick's. They're originally from New York. But Baker's chocolate was designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, finished in 1877. 100 years later, we got the church across the street by another Henry Cobb. Interesting relationship between these two buildings, excuse me. The church, Trinity Church from 1877, the office building, the Hancock Tower of 77. You'll notice the Hancock Tower set back from the street a little ways. That is because they did not want to block the sunlight from Trinity's windows. So on a beautiful Sunday morning, they still get full sun in their sanctuary. There's a really cool site coming up on our left. Check this out, especially if you want a picture of it. Check this out. It is... hello. Henry Cobb wanted to use new Boston to reflect old Boston, and in doing so paid homage to the architects that came first. We'll go all the way around Trinity Church. You'll get to see the whole, all angles of it. Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel is on our left. A very popular site for movie filming. There's a tax credit in Massachusetts for filmmakers. So it is tax credit for filmmakers. So yeah, I was wondering who might want to do that. Tax credit for filmmakers in Massachusetts, so it's a little cheaper to film here than some other places. But as he said, Dexter. So Showtime's Dexter is doing an extra reboot season. They filmed here just back in May, I think it was. Boston Public Library is up here ahead of us, going to be on our left. Boston had the very first public lending library in the country. That is to say, the very first public library to let you take a book home for free and trust you to bring it back. Under the windows are the names of the people with really late library books. No, of course not. Famous folks who've made major contributions to literature and academia. Halfway down the block to our left is the finish line of the Boston Marathon. The Boston Marathon started in 1897. This will be the 125th running this October. It's usually run in April. They delayed it 6 months so they could run it in person. Which we'll see a better view of in just a moment. Trinity is, and it's the only church on that list, the only building from Boston on that list. And that is largely thanks to the style of architecture. It's called Richardsonian Romanesque. And this was the first distinctly American style of architecture to be copied in Europe. When you consider how long we were copying European architecture, that is a really big deal. The property on our left was originally Boston Technical. It's coming out up at the end of this block. The Arlington Street Church. Arlington Street Church was the very first church and the very first public building built in Boston's Back Bay. They're usually open from 11 until 4. And they were heavily involved in the abolitionist, the rector of the church. There's a statue of him facing Arlington Street Church across Arlington Street. And we are back to Boston Public Garden over here on our left. Oldest public botanical garden in the country, dates back to 1837. There's over 100 different species of trees to be found here from all over the world. And you can see the lagoon with the swan boats over there. The swan boats are pontoon-style paddle boats, benches in the front where the guests get to sit. In the back is a swan sculpture where the operator sits and pedals about 7 miles a day. We are so glad these ducks aren't Flintstone power like that. Sounds exhausting. Probably good workout though. I imagine those college kids are in pretty good shape by the end of the season. In Lohengrin, there's... And so, this was initially the shoreline. And in fact, when they built the parking garage under Boston Common the construction workers found the remains of fish weirs. Back before the English settlers arrived, the Native Americans around here used these traps called fish weirs made of sticks to trap fish as the tide went out. They'd harvest the traps at low tide. So a lot of those were, stuck in the muck over the centuries and found when they created the parking garage. We're gonna head up Beacon Hill in just a moment. Beautiful neighborhood, although very expensive to live in, but free to walk around. And if you do walk through Beacon Hill, I recommend playing a game of I Spy, looking for purple window panes. Now the purple glass in Beacon Hill is antique glass, and it's technically defective. There's only a few pieces left today. I'll point out some of it coming up. Essentially, the glass was clear when it was made, but there was too much manganese oxide in it. And so when the sunlight hit it, it turned purple with a chemical reaction. There's a building coming up that has a few pieces left, so that'll be your freebie with the flagpole on it up here. You can see some right there. That's what it looks like. You'll have to find the rest, but there's an example. Once a shameful defect, now a priceless antique. Amazing what a couple hundred years will do, right? And now we come to the top of Beacon Hill. This is where we find the new State House, which is actually not all that new. It was built in the 1790s. The brick portion was by Charles Bulfinch, the first homegrown architect of America. He was self-taught as opposed to going to school in Europe. And he worked mostly in the Federalist style. A lot of symmetry involved in that. You'll find his work in a lot of different capitals, actually. A lot of the early states have state houses by Bulfinch. And the Capitol building in D.C. Cornerstone the cornerstone was laid on July 4th, 1795 by then Governor Sam Adams and his friend Paul Revere. Across the street from the State House is a monument to the Massachusetts 54th, the first all-volunteer black unit to fight for the North and the South during the American Civil War. If you've ever seen the movie Glory, it's about those soldiers. Coming up on our left is a statue of Mary Dyer. Mary Dyer was a Quaker, and she was persecuted by the Puritans. The Puritans came here for religious freedom, but really it was the freedom to practice their religion and their religion exclusively. If you did not conform, they wanted you to leave. Mary Dyer tragically was executed by the Puritans simply for having different religious beliefs. Now, however, she serves as a symbol for freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly, cited as such in the Massachusetts State Bill of Rights written by John Adams, which was in the...
It's the State House.
And now we are coming down the northern slope of Beacon Hill.
From the other side?
It's in the blocks to our left that you'll find most of Boston's Black Heritage Trail. Sites like the African Meeting House and a lot of spots involved in the Underground Railroad, that network of hiding places for people escaping slavery to more safely and easily make their way up to Canada where they can have a better chance at freedom. My favorite story about Boston's Underground Railroad is about this guy named Lewis Hayden. Lewis Hayden was a free black man living in Beacon Hill, and his house was part of the Underground Railroad. Anytime that a bounty hunter came to his home, he would answer the door with a pistol in one hand and a candle in the other, and explain that under his floorboards was gunpowder, meaning all he'd have to do would be drop the candle and... Now, thankfully, he never had to follow through on those threats, because they worked. Nobody ever dared to search his home. Anybody hiding there, he could keep them safe as long as they needed to stay there, until they wanted to move along to the next part of their journey. In a moment, we're going to head into the west end of Boston. The West End has changed a great deal in the past 75 years or so. It was once a quaint little immigrant community, very high family values, very low crime rate, unfortunately very low income. And in the 1950s and 60s, tragically, it was demolished. They called it urban renewal. This idea that we need to clean up our rundown neighborhoods. In theory, not a bad idea. In practice, very problematic. A lot of cities did not take into consideration, or let's be honest, didn't care, that the high-rise apartment complexes being built were way too expensive for the low-income residents to afford. A lot of people were displaced. They lost their homes, they lost their communities, they were forced to move elsewhere. One of the families affected... Oh, let's quack at these kids. You ready? Time stream! Quack, quack! Can you imagine having a daycare where ducks drive by all day? They love it. They haven't had a lot because of the heat, but we were doing pick up time to get to play. One of the families affected by the West End redevelopment was the Nimoys. You might know their son Leonard, Mr. Spock of the original Star Trek TV series. Live long was passionate about preserving the history of this place as well. Coming up on our right is a building you might recognize. This building is a movie star. It was a very good actor too. In the film, it depicts the police headquarters. In reality, it's the Departments of Unemployment and Mental Health. Pretty different purposes. The last movie to come out that was filmed in Boston actually just came out a couple weeks ago. Free Guy, starring Ryan Reynolds. And they rerouted our traffic for about 3 months in 2019. So I'm very curious to see what it was all about. Also, I've seen the previews, and it's very obviously filmed in Boston. No major sites that like people from outside of Boston would find iconic, but pay attention and you might see things you recognize from even coming on this tour. There are some very obvious sort of lesser known landmarks in Boston. It's very, very obvious it was filmed here. Fridays and Saturdays, and it's still staffed in part by people who grew up in the West End. I talked to a guy on Tuesday in there who said he grew up there and it was the best 11 years of his life before they were forced to move out. Sounds like it was a really magical neighborhood. Ahead of us is the last tenement standing. This is the only tenement left from the historic West End. It reminds me of the house in the Pixar movie Up, The Way It's All Bad Lonesome. Still apartments, at least one of them is an Airbnb, you can actually stay there. Imagine dozens of buildings, or actually hundreds of buildings, really, just like that. That's what the neighborhood looked like. They called it the greatest neighborhood this side of heaven, and those who grew up there that still remember it, they still remember it very, very fondly. They even carved it into the wall over there. It was a complete melting pot. You know, Boston has... Coming up on our right is the Leonard P. Zakim Bunker Hill Memorial Bridge, crown jewel of the Big Dig highway construction project. It was named for Jewish American civil rights activist Leonard P. Zakim, who was well known for building metaphorical bridges between communities. The Big Dig was the project where we put our highway underground. It was the largest public works project in the history of the United States. Went horribly underestimated, went 9 years longer than planned, and billions of dollars over budget. The results are pretty remarkable, though. The Big Dig, if you understand what was going on, it actually makes a lot of sense why it took as long as it did. Because one of the hurdles they had to overcome was the construction workers. Really cool. The city archaeologists came up with a book featuring 50 items discovered during the Big Dig, and little stories about each one and what history they could find. A lot of folks who want to audition for the Symphony Orchestra's horn section, I see. It's rush hour. There's not much we can do with it. Go with the flow. Middling for it, honestly. I know it says 1910, but it actually was finished in 1912. Don't be over anxious to put a date on your construction projects, because you might end up taking a lot longer than you expect. But the Lechmere Viaduct was built in the early 1900s, and now, over 100 years later, they are expanding the Green Line into Somerville and Medford, and so they need to fix this up because it honestly hasn't had all that much construction done on it, or much renovation or maintenance done on it over the years, only the bare minimum. So if they're going to have more trains going over it, they need to do some pretty extensive work. Finish the tracks, the renovations on the original spot, their original location out on Boylston Street, remember? This is where they moved to, up here on our left. And the Museum of Science is one of our 3 duck stops. The other 2, of course, are the Prudential Center in the Back Bay and the New England Aquarium where we started our tour. If you haven't been to the aquarium yet, I really recommend it. We have 1 duck here right now. Wave at our friends over here. Or 2 ducks. Yeah, there are 2 ducks still. Wave at our friends. Oh, lucky them. It looks like they get to go home. We have 3 duck stops. The New England Aquarium, if you haven't been to the New England Aquarium yet, I really recommend it. It is so much fun. They have this one 4-story tall tank that is so big they had to build the tank before they could build the rest of the aquarium around it. It is home to, among others, Myrtle the turtle. Myrtle is an almost 100-year-old sea turtle and is absolutely fantastic. She basically rules that tank. Learning and Cultural Exchange Company. Their founder, Bertel Holt, really wants to spend his life breaking down barriers through language learning and cultural exchange. So his staff got him a very symbolic birthday gift. When he turned 50, they got him a piece of the Berlin Wall. He wants to spend his life breaking down barriers. They got him a piece of the largest barrier ever to come down in his lifetime. It's on display at the Holt International Business School over to our left. EF has international schools. They have a travel agency for educational tours. They are the official English language teachers of the Olympics. Their North American headquarters, their North American headquarters is over here to our right. Their international headquarters is in Switzerland. In a moment, we're going to see the Lynch Family Skateboard Park, which is the largest skateboard park in New England and 3rd largest in the country. It's named for the Lynches of Fidelity Investments, who made the biggest donation to have it happen. Over here. And we're going to head to the water next, so I have to reiterate some of our safety information. The life jackets are above our heads. The small ones have the red tabs for anybody under 90 pounds. Large ones are yellow tabs. If we were to need them on the water, I would let you know if we had such an emergency that we needed them. We have 2 fire extinguishers, one to my right, another one under the back seat. 2 life rings, one above Lynn's head, another one on the outside back of the deck. 2 radios. One talks to our dispatcher and other ducks. The other one I'm turning on right now talks to the Coast Guard and other boats. We have 2 2. I've gone through all of those. Also, the emergency exits are the windows. Yes. And Lynn's going to reach on our left to engage our propeller, and then we're going to head into the water. We're going to blow the horn as we go down the ramp. Here we go. Ta-da! You can do that with any vehicle once. If you want to keep getting in and out all day, you need to float. So welcome to the Charles River. Off to our left is Boston, the 1600s, who later became King Charles I. He got to name the river thanks to English explorer John Smith, the very same John Smith as the famous Pocahontas legend. The accuracy of which is a story for another day. But for our purposes, John Smith was a real person. He created a map of what is now New England, brought the map back to Old England, and showed the royal family. And 15-year-old Prince Charles took one look and said, "Oh, that's a very long river, let's name it after me." And here we are in 2021, still calling it the Charles River. I guess he had a pretty good idea about how to be remembered. The Charles River was originally called the Massachusetts River. That was the local Native American tribe here in what is now Massachusetts. The name means people of the hills. The Great Blue Hills of Massachusetts, very important for their ceremonies. Now you look at the color of the water today, bluish green, you say, yeah, I love that dirty water. Except it's not dirty. Actually the cleanest urban river in the country. It once was dirty. To explain the color of the water today though, I would give you the metaphor of ever make a cup of tea. You put the leaves into the water, it turns the water a different color. That's exactly what's happening here. This is basically a giant teacup, but I wouldn't drink it. The leaves that fall into the water, they release their tannic acids. This is another great opportunity if anybody has any questions, any burning curiosities. So up ahead of us, we are making our way up to the Longfellow Bridge, named for poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Henry Longfellow used to live in Cambridge, Harvard professor. Had a lot of friends in Beacon Hill, though, so he oftentimes would cross the Charles River at this spot, which was once the old bridge. When they replaced the old West Bridge, they named the new one after Longfellow. And one of Longfellow's most famous poems was Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, which tells the story of the events leading up to the first battles of the Revolution, which happened in April of 1775. Now, of the Boston Tea Party. The Sons of Liberty, the revolutionaries, they were spying on the British Army with their Committee of Public Safety, which was their spy network. And the Committee of Public Safety figured out that the Army was going to target Lexington and Concord. In Lexington was the Provincial Congress, the leaders of the Revolution. And in Concord there was a storehouse of munitions. So the spies knew it was going to happen, they just didn't know when. So the messengers were alerted to be ready to ride at a moment's notice. Finally, on April 18th, they get the word that the British Army is marching, and they all leave their homes under the cover of darkness to spread the word that the British Army is heading toward Lexington and Concord. Now, of course, we have this cultural memory of one single guy on horseback yelling, "The British are coming!" Start interrogating that just for a little bit and it starts falling apart. Okay, so even if you're yelling, it's going to take more than one person to warn all the suburbs of Boston to get ready for a possible attack by the British Army, because we don't know if they might go to other places too. 2, you don't want to yell at all. If the army is coming to arrest your friends, that's treason. And you don't want to be arrested too before you can spread the word. And also there's loyalists in the suburbs, so you're not going to be yelling. You're going to be going to the homes of the militia captains, knocking on the door and whispering to them. 3, this was a British colony. Everyone saying the British are coming is kind of redundant. The actual message was the redcoats are coming or the regulars are coming. And again, it would have been whispered at doorways, not yelled from horseback. There were 20, maybe even 50 riders out that night. Why do we only focus on Revere? Well, he had the best publicist. Henry Bridge up there. All our MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Off in the distance, there's a Citgo advertisement. Right next door to that is Fenway Park, home of Boston Red Sox. Oldest major league ballpark in the country. Fenway had their first opening day, April 20th, 1912, and they are still a major league ballpark today. I have a really loud. Do you see the Citgo advertisement? See, there's a crane and there's a Citgo advertisement behind it. A little bit to the left of that. It's hard to point out the park specifically because the lights aren't on, but there are trees. You can just barely make one out. It's this boxy figure in the opening between the building under construction and the tall building on the left. It's over there. A lot of sailboats out here and windsurfers too. Most of them come from community boating up ahead of us. Community boating has been around since the 1940s. And they want to make sure anybody who wants to learn how to sail gets the opportunity. So they have a program for kids, and if you qualify for financial aid, you can actually sail there for as little as $1. Boston Duck Tour supports community boating with our Quack Give Back program. And when guests purchase souvenirs or tickets, we ask, do you want to round up to the nearest dollar for charity? If anyone did, thank you very much. That's Quack Give Back. And we collect that pocket change from our guests throughout the season, and at the end of the year, we match it 100% and give it to organizations like Community Boating. spotlights, and it kind of looks like it might be a greenhouse. It's not a greenhouse. It's owned by Harvard University. And one of the inventors that spent a lot of time there, a guy named Edmund Land. Edmund Land was fascinated by the polarization of light. So if you have polarized sunglasses, think Edmund Land. He invented polarized lenses. He was also into photography, and he created the technology for aerial photography, as well as the instant camera, for the Polaroid camera. Edmund Land was a moral victory, a symbolic victory, a turning point in the American Revolution. In the 1700s, the British Army was the most powerful military. Definitely date back to the 1700s. There's at least one establishment, the Bell and Hand Tavern, that dates back to 1795. The Union Oyster House is 1826. But we think there's been business. He served as mayor. He served as governor of Massachusetts. He served in jail. A little bit of a rascal. He had a friend who wanted to be a postal worker that couldn't pass the civil servants exam. And so he took the test for his friend. What a nice guy. Except it was 6-year-old Kennedy Greenway. And it is named for John F. Kennedy's mother, Rose. It stretches from the north end to Chinatown, whatever direction you're heading toward delicious noodles. Rose Kennedy was born and raised in the north end back when it was an Irish neighborhood. And she lived